Alex Menard, and I actually went up to Marble in one of my travels here this summer and fall, and went into the town of Marble trying to find somebody to actually do a program for us. And I managed to get connected to Alex up there. And Alex lives in the Marble area, and he's sort of the local historian. He's got a lot of information about the quarry up there and kind of the history of Marble. So I twisted his arm not too hard, and Alex is learning how to work with Zoom and everything off of his cell phone in Marble. So
Hey, he's a
Marble,
pro. We got it here.
you're up, Alex. Go for it.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, I guess. Well, first of all, a correction. There is no cell phone service in Marble. So I'm off a satellite internet. That's what we have. So can everybody see my slides okay?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, well, I'm starting with just scenery, just to give you kind of a sense of the place here. This is a site that's between Redstone and Marble in the Crystal River Valley. And you know, Fort Collins is a long ways away from here. So let's just take an imaginary trip. Go over the Continental Divide, and you're at the headwaters of the Colorado, and you go on down into Glenwood Springs through beautiful Glenwood Canyon. And then in Glenwood, the Roaring Fork River comes down from Aspen from the southeast. And then about 10 miles up the Roaring Fork is where the Crystal River comes in. The Crystal River is between the Ragged Mountains and the Elk Mountains. And it's the most beautiful valley in Colorado, I think. And speaking of gratefulness, like Karen was talking about, I'm thankful that I've spent most of my life here in this valley. So first of all, I want to tell you a little bit about geology, because geology involves the history in a big way, more than anything else. This is Chair Mountain. It's a igneous intrusion. And if I tell you it's 12 million years ago, you're going to think that's a long time, but you just wait. So 12 million years ago, this rose up. And the reason why it's so rugged is mainly because 1 million years ago was an ice age. And the glaciers carved out the mountain on all sides, producing just totally sharp ridges. And this mountain is about 12,700 feet high. And it's kind of the gateway peak. It's the edge of the Ragged Mountains. And to your left, if you go up the valley there, you're going to hit Marble in about 5-6 miles. Well, anyway, talking about geology, let's go way back, 350 million years ago. Most of the continents were together in one mass called Pangaea, and they were all at the equator. And the rest of the Earth was just ocean. At the bottom of this tropical ocean was deposited limestone from all the sea creatures. Their shells were deposited on the bottom, and limestone was created 350 million years ago. Then there was some mountain building. The first time was 300 million years ago, when a couple of mountain ranges in Colorado rose up, and their erosion created sandstones, and those became the red sandstone of the Maroon Bells, which I'm sure you guys have all seen. Then about 70 million years ago was the biggest event. This thing was the most effective thing in the history of the Crystal Valley than anything that's happened before or since. And here's what happened. It was called the Laramide orogeny. It was a mountain building period, and the igneous rock masses came up from underneath, and the heat and pressure changed the existing rocks, the older rocks that were already deposited there. One of them I just told you about was the limestone, right? So that limestone was heated and pressured, and that became what we call the Yule Creek marble, which is the most famous marble in the world right now. It's also the most valuable marble, and the quarry in Marble is considered now the most productive marble quarry in the world at this point. And that's all because of the Laramide orogeny 70 million years ago. At the same time, though, two other things happened because of the same heat and pressure. For one thing, in the town of Crystal, which let's just go to the next slide. This is Crystal. And what happened there was that the heat and pressure changed some of the associated solutions of metal sulfides. in the rock. And those became, they were superheated water, and they went into the cracks in all the igneous rock that you see around there. And that became all the hard rock minerals like lead, zinc, copper, silver, and gold. And those were that was the first industry. The first industry in the valley, besides maybe beaver trapping, was the hard rock mining. And that took place, people came not up the valley from Carbondale, but they actually went over Schofield Pass from Crested Butte, because those of you who know history know that the first place the railroad came over the Continental Divide was at Marshall Pass, and it came down, and Gunnison was a major center for mining, both in the San Juans to the south and to the north in the Elks and the West Elk Mountains. So places like Aspen, Carbondale, Crested Butte, Silverton, all those areas were kind of satellites of Gunnison. And originally, Crystal is above Marble. It's a ghost town now, except in the summer. People do own property there and they stay there. And Crystal was a fairly successful mining era. Lead was the main valuable mineral, also silver and some other minerals too. This is the famous Crystal Mill. I can see a picture of you guys in the building, in the room there. Raise your hands, who's seen this? I can see some hands going up. Okay, so this is one of the most famous scenes that ever is around. People say it's the most photographed spot in Colorado, but that's obviously not true. The Maroon Bells has hundreds, thousands of people visit on a daily basis. This Crystal Mill might have hundreds, so it's definitely not the most visited. The only thing I can say about it is maybe this is the scene that's on more dentist offices than any other scene in America. And this was the Crystal Mill, and basically what it was, to the right-hand side, you see a bunch of debris just sitting there on the slope. That was an actual mill there. That's where they used the water power that went over the waterfall to actually grind up rocks and produce ore for smelting. But the main part, the shaft there, was an air compressor. And what it did was to just make compressed air and send it in a pipe to a mine about a mile away, just to provide air for breathing in a deep mine called the Black Queen Mine. So Marble started first as a subsidiary to this hard rock mining in the town of Crystal, and even above Crystal, another town called Schofield, which is even higher, closer to Crested Butte. But this is the Hoffman Smelter, and this started in the 1890s. And this was a place to crush and smelt ore from Crystal and Schofield. And this predates the marble industry because it started in the 1890s. The guy who owned this smelter was named Hoffman, and he was the first mayor of Marble, which was founded in 1899. This is William Mason. He was the founder of Marble. He came over from Crystal, over Schofield Pass, and he got a hold of the whole property and owned it all. The first map of Marble says Marble, Colorado, Gunnison County, and then it says property of William Mason. This guy owned the whole town. So when more people moved in, they bought it from him. So in the late 1890s is when the marble industry first started. And one of the most common questions is, how did they find the marble? And that was such an easy answer because, in fact, the marble is a large band of rock that's visible for many miles on the surface. And for history people, remember that even before the white man was in Western Colorado legally, when it was still Ute territory, there were several geological expeditions. The Hayden survey was one of them. And they pretty much climbed every mountain and mapped every single rock formation. They were looking for the value of the rocks. And so marble was known from the very beginning, but developing it required transportation. And you can see right here the situation. It's at 9,500 feet is where the quarries are on the lower left. And the peaks up there rise up to 11,500 feet. You'll notice that there's really no trees on the slopes to speak of. And that's because all of those are avalanche slopes that run every single year. And just as an aside, I got to tell you that Marble Peak is on the left-hand side there. And it's actually a very popular place for people to backcountry ski. It's one of the most popular places around. You could have several dozen cars on a weekend winter day of people skiing up Marble Peak and skiing back down. Here's inside the quarry. Originally, the equipment that they had was pretty primitive. They had very few diamond tools. Most of the cutting was done by drilling and inserting wedges, or even just using water into the cracks and having the water freeze and break off blocks. And then they had cranes to haul the blocks down. Just to go back to my other slide there, at the bottom of the picture, you can see kind of a crazy roller coaster ride. That's how they transported the blocks down. On the left side in the white portion, you can see a big crane. And then you can see that they would load the blocks onto that wild ride down to the bottom. And then in the center bottom, you can see the beginning of the tracks. And that's where a electric tramway came and loaded blocks and took it to the quarry, which is in the town of Marble, about 3.75 miles away. So anyway, this is inside the quarry. They originally just had portals, and they started carving down, and eventually they had to lift the blocks several hundred feet to get them out of there. And then they had that wild ride down into town. This is the mill site. This is in the town of Marble. You can see the Crystal River on the very lower left. Then you can see the entire building. First, some accessory buildings along the riverbank. The entire building was a 1/4 mile long. And it was, at the time, the largest marble mill in the world. And then to the upper right, you can see rows of houses. And that is the main street coming into town. It's called Park Avenue. And it was called Dago Town in those days, because most of the people who worked at the quarry were Italians. There were also Austrians and Greeks. But most of the people that worked at the quarry from about the turn of the century until the 1940s were Italians, and they were imported here because they were already skilled in producing articles with marble, both statuary things and monuments and buildings. So on the right-hand side of the building, you'll see towers, kind of wooden towers. You can see kind of a trestle structure. That was a big unloading crane. The electric tram would come and they could unload the blocks right there on the right-hand side of the building and bring them right into the building. Okay, so we're at the mill site. This is in the town of Marble. This is where the marble was processed for over 300 major buildings in the United States, including the most famous one was the Lincoln Memorial, but also in Denver, there's the post office, and the state capitol is a great story. The tile floors on all the levels of the state capitol were done right at this site here in Marble in 1896. And I don't know if you heard me talking about where the rail line is and everything. I'll tell you again. On the left-hand side of the building, you can see the rail line. That was the Crystal River and San Juan Rail. And that was where the outgoing products went. On the left-hand side of the building, I'm sorry, the right side of the building, above the building, you can see the trestle, and that's where the electric tramway came in with the marble blocks from the quarry. So you can see the whole operation set up there. But in 1896, the train had not come to Marble yet. So they made the tiles here at the mill site, but the tiles were transported by cart, horse-drawn carts, or even on sleighs in the wintertime, all the way to Carbondale, 28 miles, where they were loaded onto the train, and then they went to the state capitol. So that's kind of a good, amazing story about a production that happened at the mill site.
Got 5 minutes, Al.
This is Colonel Meek. He was the guy who came up with the bucks. He was the, I don't know, you call him the robber baron or call him the industrialist and entrepreneur. He came up with $2.5 million, and he was able to build the mill and the quarry and get the whole thing going. And believe it or not, when he finished the Lincoln Memorial, which is a 2-year project, employing 1,000 people in 24-hour, 3 shifts a day, they only made $1 million off the Lincoln Memorial. And they actually went broke after that. So that's a kind of a good, amazing story. This is the Marble Church. It came on a train car from Aspen. And the story behind that is kind of an interesting story because it relates to the boom and bust cycle. In the 1890s, when they demonetized silver and no longer was used to back up currency, there was a sharp drop in demand for silver, and Aspen crashed. This church was in Aspen. It was built in Aspen in the 1880s, making it the oldest building in Marble. But it came on a train car to Marble in 1905 because it was just extra. Aspen had already peaked and Marble was just beginning to happen. This is Sylvia Smith. She was a pretty cool lady. She came from Crested Butte. She was a journalist and she was also a socialist. And she actually always wrote on the side of the workers and against the company. And the company had another paper. Her paper was a socialist paper. The company paper was called the Marble Booster, and it was just boosting the industry. She was in favor of unionization and workers' rights and all that stuff. In 1912, the mill site that I showed you before was hit by a huge avalanche and wiped it out. And she wrote that morning on the paper headline that Marble company's misdoings have been redressed by this calamity. And she thought it was a good thing that it happened. And because of that, the town seized her printing press and ran her out of town. They put her on the train and ran her out of town. She went to Denver, got an attorney, came back, and over a period of quite a few years, the lawsuits went all the way to the state Supreme Court. She was victorious, and she came back and won $100,000. And when she collected her money, she came back to town with the sheriff and actually bankrupted a lot of the businesses of the people that ran her out of town. This is the bell tower. This is a recreation of a tower that was a fire bell right downtown. And this picture is only a few days old. I live right next door to this, so this is what I see when I look out my window. This is the high school, which is now the museum, and it's also the charter school. So it's a multi-use building. It dates from 1910. It was a great high school. It was really based on the marble industry. In the first place, it was painted green and white, which were the company colors. You can see they spent some extra time. That's ashlar marble. They're blocks that have been kind of finished on the edges and left rough in the middle. They spent some extra time to really fix up the high school. It's the only building in town left that has any marble on it.
Alex, we got about
This was the marble
3
ski
minutes.
area. Okay, the marble ski area happened in the 70s, and it was a plan to make something just like Snowmass in our tiny valley, which is less than a mile wide. And it's also very geologically unstable. This plan was very ill-conceived, both from an engineering standpoint, from a real estate standpoint, and from a land use standpoint. And it operated for a couple of years and then it shut down. And one reason why the town reformed the government was to oppose this ski area. In the 1940s, the town essentially shut down because of the Second World War. The quarry in the town pretty much gone. At that point, there were several mudslides which buried the bell tower that I just showed you. And so Marble was just sleepy until the 70s. And when somebody proposed this giant ski area and it got shut down, it just was not a good idea. The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier was this giant block. It was created here. This is the original one going down from the quarry to the mill site. It actually was not carved here. The Vermont Marble Company owned the quarry at that time, and they took the block to Marble to make the tomb. And there's an example of the tomb. Unfortunately, the tomb got huge cracks in it, and they thought it needed to be replaced. And so they actually quarried a new block, and it was a huge mistake because the Department of Defense, which owns the monument, thought it would not be proper just to replace the block because they didn't know what to do with the old block because it's a monument, it's historic. So they decided to repair it instead. And now today, the largest block ever quarried to replace the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier still sits in the millside parking lot. This is about our most current problem, and that is just an overwhelming use of motorized vehicles. We are just inundated by tons of ATVs and motorcycles. It's a tiny town. We have only one paved street. We have no shoulders on the roads. And the amount of people that use the roads to access Crystal, which I showed you the Crystal Mill, it really makes it hard for the traditional users, the people who are pedestrians. And that's why I made this little poster. I mean, this is just a sketch for a poster, but I mean, this was the issues that I see about the motorized vehicles. Some of you guys are probably ATV users. I understand that, but the fact is some ATV users are not very careful about their use. And in fact, just the amount of use is overwhelming our small area. And with that, I'll take questions if you guys have any.
We've got time for a couple of questions. Alex, questions?
Any questions?
So Alec, if people come up there in the summer, what would they do in Marble if they were to visit?
Well, we have the best barbecue joint in town. Everybody, it's famous all around. It's called Slow Groovin' Barbecue. We have a lake that's got great fishing. The mill site and the quarry can both be visited. The Crystal Mill, you can get up there. You can either hike, or I recommend taking a Jeep, or even just a regular car can drive it. The town, including the Chamber of Commerce, is really discouraging ATVs because they're just the noisiest, and they really impact the other users. We also have lots of hiking trails, and the town of Redstone is right nearby. That's another historic place. And we're also near the Black Canyon of the Gunnison. That's a couple hours away. So it's one of the most magnificent national parks. The fall colors, like you saw in my first picture, at the end of September, driving from Marble to Crested Butte is considered one of the best fall color drives because it's considered one of the largest aspen groves in the world.
Can you do that drive with a regular car, Alex?
That drive is a graded dirt road. It's heavily used. It's called the West Elk Loop. It's a scenic byway. Crested Butte is a really cute little Victorian town too.
Well, thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Yes.